Chapter 4 Chapter 4 Chapter 4 Police Force in Subcontinent. Police Force in Subcontinent. Police Force in Subcontinent. Ancient India. Ancient India. In ancient India, the existence of police was found much earlier. The Dharam Sutras prescribed use of force in the day to day administration as an important duty of the king. Coercive force was the sanction behind the laws. The basic unit for policing was the village. The village headman and the village elders constituted the court, which tried and decided both civil disputes and criminal cases. Mahabharata calls the village headman Gramdipati. Gramdipati. In Buddhist literature, he is called the Gram Bhajoka. Gram Bhajoka. Under him was another functionary called Nagar Gutka. Nagar Gutka, later converted into the village watchman, who was responsible for arresting and executing robbers. Kutalia's Arthashastra mentioned a regular police hierarchy, namely Sangrahana, Sagrhana, Snagrana, serving a group of 10 villages, the Karvatika for 200 villages, Don Mupka for 400, and Sathania for 800 villages. These was ancient on collection of intelligence. There was accent on collection of intelligence during Mughal era. The history of evolution of policing in Pakistan can be traced back in events following entry of Muslims in the subcontinent. The Mughals and the Britishers laid the rudiments of policing in Indo-Pak subcontinent. The history of development of policing has never been smooth. Political biases and caprices have deflected the winds of change. The strong forces have been winners in the end. It was in the era of Akbar, 1556 to 1605 AD, that administration was divided on functional basis. The Kotwal was thus a city magistrate, but his authority did not coincide with Qazi. The picture of Malik Khudabakhsh, first Kotwal of Lahore, is given at the adjacent page. It represents the full dress and the sword in his right hand. Policing in the subcontinent. In the 10th century, India was characterized by the existence of a large number of autonomous princely states. In both north and south, the direction of police work and disposal of criminal cases fell within the purview of village assemblies. These were the panchayats that consisted of the male residents, though the severe punishments were apparently inflicted by the order of the king. In 1181 AD, Sultan Muhammad Ghori, the Muslim ruler of Kabul, invaded the Punjab and left there a garrison, which was attacked by Khusro Malik Muhammad. In 1186 AD, he knocked again at gates of Lahore and subdued Khusro Malik. He left behind Qutbuddin Aibak 1206 to 1206 to 1206 to 1210, his slave, as in charge of the Indian government. He became the first Muslim ruler of the India and took steps to consolidate the Muslim rule and the institution of police force. He introduced the symbol of police as horse with a robust soldier on its back. His picture was the first king who introduced police system in the subcontinent is given at the adjacent page. after his death in Lahore in November 1210 AD in a polo accident. His successors, called the Sultans of Delhi, completed his work. In 1526 AD, when Zahiruddin Babur, 1483 to 1530 AD, founded the Mughal dynasty, he set up the administration on the lines of the Muslim rule, which guarded the enforcement of laws and administration of the Islamic code through the judges, qazis appointed by the Sultan. The local security was made the responsibility of the village community through its zamindar. The headmen and the effective police were the local commanders' military forces. The rulers recognized the vast difference between the complexion and proclivities of rural and urban population and divided accordingly their police into two distinct bodies under Faujdar and the Kotwal respectively. The rural population was dispersed over large areas, engaged in agriculture, and was simply in its lifestyle. Albeit, there was always fear of rebellion brewing up under the tutelage of some ambitious chieftains in places that were away from the areas of the kingdom. The rural policing of the Mughals was therefore of a paramilitary nature. Politically, a number of villages were grouped to form a mahalla or pargana. A number of parganas formed a sarkar, and again a number of sarkars together made up a subha or province. The Faujdar was the head of the sarkar, the equivalent of the present day district. He had a force of horsemen and foot soldiers, some of that carried firearms and were called Barkandas. The Faujdar drew mostly on the villagers themselves to perform policing duties within the village. But the Fridi used his troops to chase robbers and dacoits to keep the highways free and safe for travelers. Suppressions of crimes of violence and hunting down pandits was his direct responsibility. When an ordinary crime was committed, the inhabitants of the village were held responsible. They were bound to produce the perpetrators or to make good the loss failing which they were subjected to fine. If they succeeded in tracing the criminal to another village, the responsibility was transferred to that village. Bigger landlords were expected to maintain peace and order within their estates as well as to curb crime and arrest criminals. Anne Akbari prescribes qualities of bravery, fairness, and compassion for the incumbent of the office of Faujdar. He was expected to counsel the errant to return to the right path and to use the minimum of force if and when necessary. It was enjoined upon him, however, to remain vigilant against any signs of rebellion and to maintain a network of informers throughout the Sarkar. Although Faujdar was an appointee of the governor of the province, he could report directly to the king, where the security of the realm was vested with. The Kotwal in the city was an important functionary of the state and in the capital. He was answerable to the king himself in important matters. The Ain Akbari lays down that the Kotwal had to have qualities of head and heart, to be brave, experienced, alert, accommodating, foreseeing, and sound in judgment. His alertness and nightly rounds of the city were to ensure that the people slept without fear. The city was divided into mohallas. The Kotwal kept a detailed record of roads, streets, lanes, and houses. He kept a record of inhabitants by their classes, their income, and mode of expenses. He also kept a record of prices of commodities, checked weights and measured, and ensured that animals of drought like bulls were not slaughtered. Every mohalla had a spokesman called the Miro Mohalla. Mere Mohalla. The Kotwal designated areas outside The Kotwal designated areas outside the city as burial grounds and a special spot for carrying out execution under the law. He built or earmarked buildings for sarais, hostelry, for travelers passing through the city and kept a watch over them. No one could enter or leave the city after a designated hour in the night. The Kotwal kept a network of informers for criminal intelligence. It was his personal responsibility to arrest thieves and robbers and to effect recoveries of stolen property. The system served the Mughals well, but as their power declined and the empire began to disintegrate, the police became increasingly ineffective and crime in both cities and rural areas increased, so that during the period of virtual anarchy in the country, complaints of daylight robberies on highways multiplied. Following the Islamic pattern of administration, the Mughals had complete separation between the executive and judiciary. A Qazi decided all cases brought before him under the Islamic law, whereas the Mir Adal decided cases of a secular nature and those pertaining to non Muslims. Learned Pandits on Hindu law assisted Mir Adal. Akbar, the great Mughal emperor, 1555 to 1605 AD, finally made an almost complete separation of the general administration of the country from the business of the land revenue. General business was brought under the control of the emperor, Shah Nishan, Shahanshah, run through the agency of the prime minister, Vakil. Revenue business was governed in a separate office known as the in charge of the revenue minister Diwan, who had direct access to the emperor. For general purposes, the empire was divided into provinces, subhas. Each subha was placed under the charge of a viceroy, sipasalar or subedar, appointed by the emperor. He used to receive orders direct from him and represented him in every matter except that of the revenue administration. In addition to that, the emperor appointed officers styled as commandants, Faujdar or Kiledar, to particular centers to discharge the duties of number one, suppressing rebellion, number two, keeping the roads open, and number three, eradicating violent crimes. Each of the large cities had a city governor, Kotwal, who used to get orders from above to carry on the rule of business. He used to be a local autocrat, combining the functions of magistrate, police commissioner, and mayor of the corporation. In addition, there were certain local functionaries, a headman, chaudhry, and an accountant, kanungo, in each village and each pargana. Though they were not government officials, but their position was recognized by the administration. The Kotwal was the police magistrate in big cities. He had no judicial authority. This function belonged exclusively to Qazi, the judge. There was a village headman, Mokadam, to look after the security functions in his area. The commandant, Faujdar, was the chief police officer as well as the military administrative head of the district. Thus, police, revenue, and judicial functions were in different hands, and policing in urban areas also differed from the policing of rural areas. Policing in British period. With the downfall of the Mughals, the East India Company appeared on the Indian scene in 1740 AD. After suppressing the various local conflicts, they brought the vast areas of India under their control. This generated a dire need to protect its territory and enlarge its state. Therefore, army was built up as a first pillar of the Indian civil service. The British subdivided the army into soldiers and police as they had formerly subdivided the imperial service into civil military. The police system really began with Cromwell, 1599 to 1658 AD. He appointed as Superintendent of Police (SP) for Calcutta in 1791 AD and extended this system to the level of districts in the next year. A daroga, a superintendent, was allocated to each district and the zamindars were relieved of their police duties. The hereditary village Police became chowkidar or watchmen, and the village authorities incidentally lost much of the prestige. The new police increased the authority of the central government by providing a force as its direct control in every part of its possessions. But they also increased its unpopularity by their oppressions and execution. They were badly paid and used their extensive powers to recoup themselves both in cash and self esteem. They were loyal and effective up to a point, but they were corrupt and heavy handed. Under the supervision of a magistrate, the Daroga was given charge of a demarcated area of roughly 20 square miles of crime control and maintenance of public order. Somehow, these reforms failed to improve the crime situation. Lord Wellesley instituted inquiries into the causes of failure to preserve peace of order in Bengal in 1801 AD. In Madras, Lord William Bentinck 1774 to 1839 AD constituted a committee in 1806 AD with same object. In 1813 AD, the Court of Directors of the East India Company appointed a subcommittee to inquire into the administration of justice and police in territories held by the company based on recommendations of this subcommittee. The Court of Directors made a series of reforms. Among other things, the establishment of darogas and their subordinates was abolished. The village police was revived instead as, according to the subcontinent subcommittee, they alone were able to muster aid and cooperation of the people at large. But by far the most important step recommended was to combine the functions of revenue, executive, and judiciary all in one authority. A combination that had been tried earlier and discarded in 1793 AD. However, matters did not improve, and in 1838 AD, another police committee was appointed by the Court of Directors to look into the desirability of introducing in India police reforms similar to those affected by Peel 1788 to 1850 AD in London in 1829 AD. This committee stressed that the chief cause of inefficiency in the police was inadequate supervision and attributed many of the injuries effects to the union of the office of magistrate with that of the collector, and therefore recommended that the collector should cease to exercise magisterial functions or control over police. The police that the East India Company had created was far from being a protection to the people. If a robbery was committed, the police were prevented from making any inquiry into it, except upon the requisition of the person robbed. That is to say, the shepherd is more revenue beast of prey than of wolf. Between 1838 AD and 1845 AD, the collector was left with the revenue administration only, and the judge magistrate was entrusted with general administration, including the maintenance of law and order and the administration of lower criminal justice. The next development was when, on the recommendation of the Torture Commission of 1855 AD, the Board of Directors approved the establishment of a separate police force under a Commissioner of Police for the entire Presidency of Madras, W. W. Robinson, who was appointed Chief of Police in May 1858 AD, submitted the synopsis of his scheme, in which he suggested that the police should be a distinct department under the direct supervision of the government. Its members of all grades were crowned with judicial powers functions and were kept under the exclusive control and management of their own officers. The government accorded general approval to this proposed scheme. In 1858 AD, after the suppression of the War of Independence of 1857, the British government decided to directly shoulder the responsibility of maintaining the administration of the country, and thereafter emphasis was laid on administration. The machinery of government was organized, a corpus of status was built, and the structure of civil service was strengthened through a draft act The superintendent of police was made to act under the orders of the district magistrate, and then Sir Charles Napier's subsequent Comprehensive Police Act of 1861 was modelled. The fact of this matter is that Sir Charles Napier conquered Sindh and first introduced police reforms in 1843 AD. Prior to it, Sindh had no village police system as prevalent in other territories that were controlled by the East India Company. Charles Napier created a separate police organization guided and supervised directly by its own officers. The Inspector General was made the head of the provincial police, and superintendents of police were appointed for each district. In this way, he is the great reformer of police in Sindh. He later on carried out the idea of people friendly police. He was the man who laid the foundation of policing in Sindh on modern lines. All later developments are the continuation of the work that he had already done. The police was made a professional organization, proving its efficiency in prevention, reduction, and control of antisocial activities. Other reforms followed in the provinces of Bombay, now Mumbai, Madras, now Chennai, and Sindh. In 1843 AD, Sir Charles Napier organized Sindh police on the lines of the Irish Constabulary. Bombay adopted the pattern, and in 1849 AD, after the annexation of the Punjab, the Sindh style of policing was introduced there also. In the cities of Madras, now Chennai, Bombay, now Mumbai, and Kolkata, where the bulk of the European population lived, and East India Company had introduced the British system on the lines of the London Metropolitan Police. This was allowed to continue. Thank you.